Hi everyone, today's video is about news and media and the different requirements that are set forth for something to be considered news. The first requirement, there are three, is that news be timely. That means of the moment. So something that's happening currently, something that is new. The second requirement is that something be dramatic, so out of the ordinary, something unusual, something unexpected. The third requirement is that it be compelling. And this one can be a little bit tricky because sometimes people think, well, I don't care about it, so it's not compelling if I don't care about such and such event. You may not care about the civil war in Syria, for example, but people in Syria definitely care about it. It is compelling to them. So for something to be considered compelling, it just has to be compelling to a particular group of people. And so timely, dramatic, and compelling. A lot of people use the terms press and news media interchangeably. That's fine. They communicate the same concept. And over the years, over the centuries, really, we've seen several communication booms in the news media and the press because of technological advances. So we used to do things a little bit differently. Back in the day, early Americans didn't have the same access to news that we do now. And that is made things particularly challenging. In terms of spreading news quickly, that wasn't necessarily an advantage of early journalism. Back in the day, of course, newspapers were the standard because they were the only option, other than mouth-to-mouth, of course. And there was a lot of competition in those early news sources. The earliest newspapers were usually called gazettes, Gazette of the U.S., the United States Gazette. It was just a name for a newspaper, and it meant you can get your news here. And so there was a lot of competition, actually amongst the founding fathers. Hamilton versus Jefferson. Once again, Hamilton and Jefferson are in a competition with one another. Hamilton got along with absolutely no one, I think. Didn't end so well for him. But back when he was still alive and well, he and Thomas Jefferson had competing newspapers. Alexander Hamilton created a newspaper that was going to be heavily supportive of the Washington administration. His goal was to boost the confidence and public morale of the early Americans in their government so that they would feel safe and secure in their government, which they had not felt under the Articles of Confederation. His focus was to make sure that the public was confident in what Washington was doing. Thomas Jefferson thought that was a load of horse-pucky, and he thought that there should be more competition. He, remember, created his own political party because he thought there should be competing political parties. He felt the same way about newspapers. And so he created his own newspaper as well. And so that began this tradition of lots and lots of different options of newspapers. They became heavily partisan very early on, and in fact were more negative, surprisingly, than even current media can be. So that was a quick devolution from the lofty ideals of Hamilton and Jefferson. But in terms of getting news, you can see in the top right, there was a Morse code machine. And this is actually Thomas Edison's personal Morse code machine. So if you want to see that, you can go see it in the Smithsonian. It's in the Museum of American History in D.C., which is really kind of cool. But Morse code wasn't invented and accessible until well into the late 1800s. Invented in the 1830s, but accessible many decades later. And so the Pony Express, the image on the left, this is a flyer recruiting young, if you will read the flyer, young, skinny, wiry fellows not over 18. Young children were recruited by the Pony Express in order to be the first postal carriers in the United States. And the concept was moving mail quickly across what would become the United States. At the time, we were still expanding. And the idea was you'd get a kid, a little skinny kid, orphan preferred because the death rate was really high for the riders on the Pony Express. You'd hop on a horse and you'd have your bag of letters and newspapers, and you'd ride to the next outpost. And so some miles across the prairie, there would be another outpost with fresh horses waiting, and you'd hop off that first horse, which was lathered up because it had been riding breakneck speed across the prairie. The horse would be well cared for. You know, there would be grooms there to take care of the horses. The kid would hop onto a different horse, a fresh horse, and he'd make out for the next outpost. And so there was a series of outposts all the way across the country. And using this very speedy process, you could get mail across the country, well, halfway across the country, from Missouri to California. It says in 10 days or less. Usually it took a couple weeks. And this was really extraordinary in terms of decreasing the time period in which people found out news. Originally, you would find out months later who the new president was, for example. For example, when Abraham Lincoln was elected, the news reached California, Sacramento, California, in just a week, which is amazing when you think we're talking about horses here. Because if you drive across country, if you go straight through, it's going to take a couple of days, maybe 3 days. And that was pretty amazing. The orphans preferred. That was because there would be no one to complain when the kids died, which happened quite a lot. If you're riding breakneck speed on a horse, and the horse, say, tumbles or hits a pothole or something like that, in the prairie, the animal hole that was dug, then you're going to fly off and maybe break something. And there's nobody else there, so eventually you're going to die to the elements. This is, incidentally, guys, why we have child labor laws now. So that is a good thing. On the bottom right-hand side, we've got a great example of why it's advantageous to have news a little bit more swiftly. This is the Battle of New Orleans, and you can see at the time, General Andrew Jackson at the top. He's wearing the blue, and he's looking very tall and proud and lordly, commanding the Americans against the British in the War of 1812. Definitely could have used some news. They probably would have liked to have known, particularly the people that died in that battle, that the war was over. It had been over for 6 weeks, but the treaty had not yet made its way to New Orleans. And so a lot of people died that didn't have to. Definitely a bummer. So there are certain advantages of getting news more quickly.